A 24-year-old woman wakes up on an autopsy table in the morgue facing death. The doctor's attention reveals a miracle, and he calls the police. The real battle for this woman who has returned from the brink of death will now begin. Watch until the end. You'll be amazed. Dawn fell heavily on Houston, Texas. The city slept under an opaque sky, almost starless. A cold wind blew through the corridors of St. Mary's General Hospital, Houston. At the back of the building, where the silence is louder and the lights are dimmer, the amphitheater was receiving another body. Dr. Michael Vargas's shift was just beginning. He already knew this place very well. The smell of formaldehyde, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, and the kind of silence that seems to whisper things no one wants to hear. When the body arrived, he walked toward the stretcher with his usual calm demeanor. His trained eyes already knew what to look for. The sheet said Emily Ramirez, 24 years old, cause of death, cardiac arrest, found unconscious in a square in the city center. Treated, but no response. No family members identified yet. Michael checked the information carefully, then looked at the body. She was young, pretty. Her face was peaceful, almost as if she were just asleep. The sheet covered her up to her chest. He took a deep breath and carefully lifted the fabric, revealing her pale skin. The room was cold, but when he touched her skin, something made the doctor pause. He frowned. The skin wasn't as cold as it should have been. It was strange, but he shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought. "It's just me," he muttered. Maybe the cold of the room wasn't enough yet. Maybe he was tired, he muttered. Maybe the cold in the room hadn't been enough yet. Maybe he was tired. Early morning amphitheater, too much silence. Sometimes the mind plays tricks. He looked back at the sheet. Almost no one dies at 24 so suddenly, but it wasn't unusual in that place either. He arranged the instruments on the table. He picked up the visi firmly, as he always did. But before making the first cut, he decided to look at her face again. There was something there that bothered him. It wasn't fear, it was a discomfort in his chest, a need to understand. He stood there for a few seconds, the visi, the silence in the room, and Emily. The wind outside hit the window with a hollow sound. Michael put the visitor aside for a moment. He wanted to check again. He reached out carefully and touched Emily's arm with 2 fingers just below her shoulder. The sensation was immediate. A slight shiver ran down his own arm. Her skin was not like the others. It was not cold enough. He frowned, squeezed a little, then slid his fingers across her pale skin, trying to feel better. It wasn't heat at all, but it wasn't that deep, icy cold he knew either. The coldness of death is unmistakable, dry, almost aggressive. Hers was warm, or maybe, just maybe, it was his hand. Too warm, too nervous. Maybe it was just tiredness. Early morning, accumulated sleep, bad coffee. "You're getting very sensitive, Michael," he muttered to himself, trying to break the thought. But the discomfort wouldn't go away. Her touch had awakened something strange, as if her body were too present, almost as if there was still something there, a lightness that didn't fit with the idea of death. He walked over to the sink. He washed his hands vigorously, as if trying to wash away his doubts. He looked at himself in the mirror, his face tired, his beard unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. He took a deep breath and returned. He checked the sheet again. The information was clear. Cardiac arrest. Confirmation signed by another doctor. Everything within protocol. But then, why did he feel that knot in his stomach again? He touched her skin. The same, a slight chill like that of a person asleep in a cold room. Not like someone who had been dead for hours. "Maybe it hasn't been that long," he said in a low voice, as if trying to convince himself. It could be that, just that. He tried to distract himself. He adjusted the sheet, organized the instruments, but he couldn't get that touch out of his head, that coldness that wasn't really cold, that uncomfortable feeling as if something was still fighting inside. But he couldn't let himself get carried away. He couldn't trust only what he felt. Medicine is science, and the sheet was clear. Still, before continuing, he looked at Emily one more time. Her face was calm, her mouth half open, her long eyelashes motionless, her chest unmoving. Everything said death. Everything. Michael moved away a little from the stretcher, the smell of the room, the thick silence, the weight of that early morning. All of it brought back old memories buried for years began to rise from the depths of his soul. He felt a lump in his throat, closed his eyes for a moment, and there, in the middle of the amphitheater, he saw a small room lit by a window with a light blue curtain. He heard a soft giggle. A little boy barefoot running through the room with a toy car in his hands. Ethan, the name came as a whisper, almost like a scare. His younger brother was only 6 years old when he got sick. It was one of those illnesses that come out of nowhere. No warning, no explanation. First, a fever, then a strange tiredness. The doctors talked and talked, but nothing seemed to work. Within a few days, the boy could no longer get out of bed, and in less than a week, he was gone. Michael still remembered the sound of the monitor turning off, his mother's scream, the emptiness that remained in the house. And more than all, he remembered his own face looking down at his brother's small body. So small, lying there, cold, still in the same kind of room where he now worked, the same position, the same silence. He squeezed his eyes shut tight, looked back at Emily. For a moment her face merged with Ethan's. It was crazy, of course, but the feeling was the same. That sensation of not being able to do anything, of always being one step behind death at that time. Michael promised himself that he would never let anyone go without trying everything. That as long as there was even the slightest chance, he would fight. That's why he became a doctor for Ethan. Not out of vocation, not for fame, but out of guilt. Guilt for not being able to save his brother, guilt for just watching. He took a deep breath. He could feel his heart beating faster. He put his hand back on the scalpel, but now his fingers were shaking a little. The metal was cold, heavy, different from all the other times. He looked down. Emily was still there, young, silent, but something inside him screamed. An old discomfort, hidden for so long. Death had already taken Ethan. It had already taken many more. Could it be? Would it be fair to accept again without saying anything? The image of his little brother came back with force, his little eyes closed, his skinny face, his body so light in his father's arms, a memory that never completely disappeared. Kyle ran his hand over his face, trying to dry his eyes. The report said that Emily was dead, but the memory of Ethan said otherwise. It told him not to repeat the mistake. No. This time he took a deep breath, trying to clear his mind. The light in the room was white and harsh. The sound of the air conditioner whirred softly on the ceiling. Outside, everything was asleep. Inside, everything should have been silent. But something wasn't. It was at that moment, at that exact second when the Visi was in the air, that he saw it. A small, almost invisible movement right there on his neck near his collarbone. Like a small heartbeat or a sigh so faint that it couldn't be heard. A tremor so slight that if he hadn't been looking in that direction, he would have missed it. He froze, his hand still in the air, the Visi motionless, holding his breath, looking again, staying still for several seconds without blinking. What was that? Was it real or just a spasm? Sometimes the body reacts even after it's dead. He had seen it before, but this didn't look like a spasm. He moved closer, lowered his head slowly. He tried to see if the movement would return. His neck was now still, the skin smooth, motionless. But what he felt at that moment was not logical. It was a tightness in his chest. An internal scream saying, "Something's not right." Look again, look carefully. He ran his fingers over his face, nervous, swallowing saliva. It was affecting him in a strange way, as if everything inside him wanted to stop him. As if time had stopped, just so he could understand that there was still something there. He moved closer to his face. He looked in, trying to find another sign. Nothing. Just the silence of the room and the sound of his own heart beating loudly. He took a step back. His hand was shaking, the blade still not touching his skin, and his doubt now greater than before. Did he really see what he thought he saw, even if it was just his imagination? And if it wasn't, that cut, the first one, was always made with precision. It was final. It couldn't be undone. It couldn't be fixed afterwards. It was a line that changed him everything. And in that moment, with his eyes fixed on that spot on her neck, Michael understood. Something inside him wouldn't let him do it. The mystery was still in the air, but the cut didn't happen. Part of him said, "It's just a reflection." That happens. The other part screamed with the voice of the past, with Ethan's voice. Listen carefully. He leaned slowly over Emily. His eyes were alert, his face serious. He put his ear to her chest, touching it carefully, as if he wanted to hear a very small secret. Nothing, just silence. The sound of his own heart beating loudly inside his chest confused him. He held his breath for a moment. He tried to listen again. He closed his eyes tightly, and nothing. The emptiness was total. He stood up slowly, frustrated, but still with that uneasiness in his chest. He brought his hand to his face, thought about giving up. But first he made one last attempt, took off his gloves, stretched out his fingers, and gently touched her nostrils, which were not moving, not breathing. Death said it was certain. Science said it was the end. But his heart, that old wounded heart full of memories, said it wasn't time yet. Ethan's face appeared again in his mind, the same silent gaze, the same silence, the same helplessness. But now in front of him was an opportunity, one last chance. He ran to the small closet in the room, opened it forcefully, and took out the stethoscope. His hands were shaking, his fingers almost dropping the device. He put the earpieces in his ears quickly, fearfully, with faith. He knelt down next to the stretcher, placed the metal part on Emily's chest, and stayed there, waiting for a second. 2, 5, and then a sound so faint that he thought he had imagined it, almost a whisper. But there it was, a heartbeat, a sound timid, distant, but alive. Really? No, he whispered, his voice trembling. It can't be. He increased the pressure on the device. He confirmed it. It was real. It was weak, irregular, but it was life. Inside a body that had already been given up for dead, life was still fighting in silence. The beastry slipped from his hand and fell to the floor with a metallic sound that echoed throughout the room. He jumped up. Someone screamed, their throat burning. "Help! She has a pulse." He ran down the hallway. He pushed the door open forcefully, without worrying about the noise, without thinking about the rules. "She's alive!" he shouted again, louder. The icy hallway was now a desperate racetrack, not out of obligation, but out of hope. What he felt at that moment could not be explained. It was a blow to the chest, a light in the darkness. It was the memory of Ethan becoming something new. Miracle or mistake, it didn't matter. Emily was breathing, and that was all he needed to keep going. The adrenaline made his vision blur. He could barely breathe, but she was there and she was alive. "John, John," he shouted, his voice raspy, "help me here." Within seconds, the assistant appeared with his eyes wide open. "She's alive. Bring the stretcher. Quick, quick." John didn't ask. There was no time. He ran to the corner of the room and pulled out the wheeled stretcher. Michael was already removing the sheets carefully but desperately. With every second, the sound of the heartbeat he had heard continued in his ear, weak, irregular, but it was life, and that was all that mattered. They moved Emily with precision, but also with urgency. Her body seemed even more fragile now, as if hanging by an invisible thread. Michael positioned her with his own hands, holding her head carefully. His fingers trembled. "Stay with me. Can you hear me? Stay. Hold on, please." he whispered almost without realizing it, as if talking to someone in a dream. The stretcher rushed through the hospital corridors. The wheels hit the uneven floor, squeaking. The white lights on the ceiling flew by one. Michael pushed her hard without stopping, his face tense, sweat running down his forehead. John ran alongside, panting. "Emergency room now," Michael shouted to the nurses crossing the hallway. "She's alive! She's alive!" The sound of his own footsteps mingled with the noise of the wheels and his heavy breathing. The hospital was still asleep, but that moment woke everything up. Every second felt like a minute. Every beat of his heart was like a countdown. Michael leaned over Emily as they ran. He moved closer to her face. Her eyes were still closed, her skin pale. "Hang on, please don't leave me now," he said softly, as if talking to his brother from back there. As if time had turned back and he had a second chance. "Are you still here? I know you are, and I'm going to get you out of this, even if I have to carry you to the end." And then he ran faster, as if he could push time forward with his own legs. Because at that moment, the only thing that mattered in the world was not letting life slip away again. The emergency room door slammed open. Michael pushed the stretcher in with great energy, his face red and sweaty, but his eyes steady. There were doctors on duty, nurses, monitors beeping, patients on stretchers. But at that moment, only Emily existed. She's alive, a heartbeat, weak, but she's there. "Come on," he shouted, his voice cutting through the air like a siren. 2 nurses ran over. One of the doctors who was there turned around in surprise. Michael kept repeating, "She has a heartbeat. She has a heartbeat." As if saying that could prevent her from disappearing, as if he could capture her life with words. They put Emily on another higher stretcher, connected the wires to her arms and chest, turned on the monitors and then the sound. A timid beep, slow but real. VIP, pause, VIP, there it is. There it is. Michael murmured with his eyes glued to the screen. "Keep going, please." One of the doctors nodded. "Irregular, but it's beating, not breathing. Intubate now." The team worked quickly. A tube was placed with precision. Oxygen was regulated. Monitors went up and down like a strange drawing of hope. The VIP was beating a little faster now, still weak, still unstable. But then Michael took a step back, felt his legs go weak, leaned against the cold wall of the emergency room, and took a deep breath. He was alive. The sound he heard now was everything. A simple, repetitive, mechanical noise, but to him it was the most beautiful sound he had heard since he was a child. Beep, beep, beep. He looked at her lying there, her eyes closed, her face colorless, but her chest moving, not yet on its own. It was the respirator that was doing the work, but the machine only works when there is something there to hold on to. He approached carefully, pulled up a chair, sat down next to the bed and gently took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but now they had a purpose, no longer as an end, but as a path. "You don't know who I am," he said softly, "but I swear I'm not going anywhere." His eyes were filled with tears, and he didn't blink. The sound of the monitor seemed to follow the rhythm of her heart, one beat at a time, one chance, one heartbeat. And in that bright room, surrounded by machines, tubes, and professionals, one thing was certain. Emily was alive against all odds, against time, against the silence. She was there, breathing. The emergency room was quieter now, but the monitors continued with their slow beeps, and the air felt heavier, as if time were slowing down. Emily was still there, motionless, breathing with the help of the machines. But something in the atmosphere was already different. It was as if life were settling inside her, looking for a way out. Michael didn't move from her side of the bed. He sat there with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped together, staring at her as if he were watching a faint flame, trying not to be extinguished by the wind. His eyes barely blinked. Sometimes he just stared at the wires, the chart, the slight rise and fall of her chest. He spoke little, but when he did, it was as if he were trying to reach some part of her that could still hear him. You're doing well. Can you hear me? You're doing fine. Just a little bit more. The sound of footsteps in the hospital could be heard in the distance. In there, in that little room, the only sound was the artificial breathing and the heart trying to keep going. Then, without warning, something changed. It was slight, almost imperceptible. Her eyelashes moved. Michael opened his eyes wide, got up slowly, approached the headboard, and leaned his face close to hers. Sweat ran down his forehead and onto his chin. His breath stopped in his chest. "Emily," he called softly. "It's me, Michael." Her eyes opened for a second. Not completely, just a little, but enough for her to see something. She blinked slowly. She seemed to be in another world, a blurry world, full of fog where everything was slow. Her eyes moved with difficulty, trying to understand where she was. And then she saw him, the shadow of Michael's face, wet with sweat, tired, but with a look that said, "You're not alone." She said nothing. She couldn't. Her eyes closed again, as if the effort had been too much. The body was still fighting, but that second, that look, was everything. Michael stood still. His breath came out in a long sigh. He squeezed her hand gently. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "You saw me, didn't you? You opened your eyes. You saw me." He didn't know if it had been real or if it was just because he was tired. But it didn't matter, because at that moment, in that small gesture, he knew Emily was still in there fighting, and that was all he needed. The hospital hallway was silent. It was still early morning, but Michael didn't feel time passing. He couldn't stay still. Although Emily was stable in bed and the monitors were flashing as they should, something inside him wouldn't calm down. Sitting in the file room with the fluorescent lights on, he held Emily's folder in his hands. There was the file, the reports, the tests, all very clear, organized, technical, and yet it made no sense. He opened the folder, flipped through the pages, starting with the initial report. Cardiac arrest confirmed. Signature of the doctor on duty. Confirmed, confirmed. But now that confirmation seemed like a terrible mistake. How could someone confirm the death of a living person? Michael rested his elbows on the table, rubbed his hands over his face, took a deep breath, and tried to think calmly, logically. He went back to the tests, read the glucose levels, blood pressure, oxygenation, electrolytes, everything normal, no activity. At least that's what they wrote, but now she was there alive. He pulled out another sheet. A simple blood test, done minutes before everything. No infection, no inflammation, nothing to explain the collapse. Another heart test. Normal? It can't be, he whispered, getting up. There's nothing here that says she was going to die. He began to pace the room, with the papers in his hands. The sound of his own footsteps echoed loudly on the cold floor. It was a mistake. Someone signed without listening properly, and the pulse and breathing. How could everyone be wrong at the same time? He looked again at the name of the doctor who had signed the death certificate. He was an experienced and dedicated colleague. He wasn't the type to get distracted. Michael knew that. So what had happened? He leaned against the wall and stared at the ceiling as if looking for an explanation there. But the hospital, as always, did not respond, only making the air feel heavier. Or was it one of those things that cannot be seen or explained? He said almost without a voice. He closed his eyes. The image of Emily lying motionless came back to his mind. And then that slight movement in her neck, the faint heartbeat on the stethoscope, her eyes slowly opening. Something had happened. Something out of the ordinary. And it wasn't a mistake. He felt it deep inside himself. It was as if death had come, but for some reason that no one could explain. It had backed away at the last second. He slammed the papers down on the table. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't, he muttered with conviction. Maybe it was luck. Maybe something else. But there, in front of that clean file, those normal test results, Michael realized that he had entered a place where medicine could not reach. And for the first time in a long time, he felt that he was facing something bigger, something that could not be contained in charts, reports, or scientific explanations. It was as if life had decided to stay. The next morning arrived with a different silence. It was no longer the silence of before, full of doubt, fear, and loss. Now it was a silence full of waiting, a kind of silence that listens, feels, breathes with you. The hospital continued at its slow pace, low lights, distant footsteps, machines making repetitive sounds, always the same. But in that room where Emily was still resting, connected to the machines, there was a kind of presence that couldn't be seen. Something between her and Michael, which without them realizing it, had already begun to grow. Michael didn't leave. He refused. He didn't even try to sleep. He stayed there all night, sitting in the same chair. From time to time, he got up to adjust her sheet. He ran his hand gently over her thin arm, over her pale face. Sometimes he spoke to himself, almost whispering, "Are you here?" And I was too. I'm not leaving. Yes. That morning, he wasn't a doctor. He wasn't thinking about protocols or shift schedule. He didn't want to know about diagnosis or justifications. He just wanted to sit there in silence, just listening. The lights on the ventilator were blinking. The sound of the monitor remained steady. Michael leaned his body against the edge of the bed, rested his elbows, intertwined his fingers carefully, and took her hand. It was instinct, a simple gesture, but when he touched her fingers, he felt something he did not expect. It was like holding the hand of someone lost at sea, a warmth, a thread of presence, as if on the other side of that deep sleep, Emily could feel him. He closed his eyes, squeezed gently, his chest tight, his mind full of memories. "You know, when my brother died, I wasn't there," he said softly. "I promised myself I would never leave anyone alone at the wrong moment again." He looked at her. Her eyes were still closed, but he kept talking as if she could hear him with her heart. "He was 6 years old. He was my best friend. I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, he was gone." A pause. The sound of the ventilator continued. "I never forgave myself. Never." His voice trembled a little. "But I'm here with you. I'm not going to leave for a minute." He ran his thumb slowly over the back of her hand. The gesture was slow, loving, like a brother would do, like someone who has already lost too much. Time passed slowly that morning. There was no rush. There were no answers. Just two worlds separated by a very thin thread, and his hand telling her without words that she was no longer alone. In that cold room, what united the two of them was not just a medical case. It was an old pain, an unresolved grief, a second chance. Michael knew it. He felt it in his whole body. And there, with his head resting on the mattress, his eyes heavy with fatigue and his heart open, he knew he couldn't let her go. No, not again. No, not this time. And there, with his head resting on the mattress, his eyes heavy with tiredness and his heart open, he knew he couldn't let her go. Not again. No, this time it was already dawn. The soft morning light came in through the slats of the blinds, illuminating the room with a calm golden hue. The hospital was slowly waking up, but there next to Emily's bed, Michael was still sitting with his eyes fixed on her. The deep circles under his eyes showed that he hadn't slept. His body was tired, yes, but his soul was awake, alert, and then suddenly a faint, almost timid movement. Emily moved her fingers, then her eyelids, and slowly opened her eyes. Michael jumped up, but stopped himself. He walked calmly toward her, his heart beating fast. "Hello, don't worry, you're safe now." She blinked in confusion. Her eyes moved slowly, trying to recognize the place to understand what was happening. She was breathing with difficulty, but she was conscious. She looked around like someone waking up from a very long nightmare. The voice came out broken, weak. "I died." The question hung in the air like a stone. Michael took a deep breath, sat down next to her again, and took her hand carefully, just like the night before. Almost, he replied sincerely. They pronounced you dead. You were already with me in the morgue, but you came back. Emily opened her eyes in surprise. Her face was transformed into fear, terror, despair. Her mouth began to tremble. She slowly turned her face to one side, trying to escape it all, but reality was there, solid as a blow to the chest. "Shah, I heard you," he said, his eyes filling with tears. "I heard everything." Michael moved closer. "What did you hear?" "The voices, the noise of the car, someone telling me I was dead." Then silence. A horrible silence. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My body wouldn't move. I just thought they buried me. She turned her face towards him with a frightened look, like a little girl asking for help. I thought they were burying me alive. The tears began to fall, first one, then another, and then everything collapsed. The crying came out loud, stuck, full of pent-up pain. I don't know what happened. I just fell onto the street. I remember everything going black. Then came that shadow, that sound of distant voices, and then just fear. Michael didn't say anything. He just squeezed her hand tighter. His eyes were wet too, but he stood firm there. Present. "You're here now," he said in a low voice. "You're not going through this alone anymore." Emily looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. Her voice came out broken, but sincere. "You saved me." Michael hesitated. He looked down. "No, you were the one who didn't give up. I just listened to you." And there, in that simple moment, in that exchange of glances and silence, something was born between them, an invisible threat of trust, recognition, life returned. Her crying gradually subsided, still fearful, still fragile. But now she was no longer alone, and that meant everything to her. The room was quieter. Now the morning light touched the white sheets and made the atmosphere feel less cold. Emily stared at the ceiling, her face tired, her eyes sunken, like someone carrying more than her body could bear. Michael remained by her side, unhurried, asking no questions. He knew the value of silence. He knew that sometimes it is silence that opens the right doors. And then, in a weak voice, Emily began to speak. "I used to play the violin on the street," she said, almost as if it didn't matter. "I played in front of a cafe downtown. People walked by. Some left coins. Others didn't even see me." She paused briefly. She took a deep breath. She played with her eyes closed. Sometimes to pretend she didn't see anyone. Other times because it was the only way to forget she was there. Michael remained silent. He just listened. She had no one. No one real. She slowly turned her face toward him. "I was kicked out of my house when I got pregnant. I was 18. My mom said I was destroying the family." Her breathing became heavier. Her voice broke between sentences, but she continued. "The father was my cousin. I was innocent. He forced me. I didn't tell anyone at first because I thought it was my fault. When I finally spoke up, I expected help, support, but they said I made it all up. That I wanted attention, that he would never do that, that I provoked him." She looked back at the ceiling, her eyes shining. "They said I was dirty, that I was lying. And my mom. My mom told me that if I went to the police, she would never speak to me again." The tears came back without crying loudly, just her face wet. Michael squeezed her hand gently. "Then I left," she said, wiping her eyes with the sheet. "I never went back and never spoke to anyone, just me and my son alone. Today I had to choose between eating or buying new strings for the violin. There were days when music was all I had left." She closed her eyes. She stayed like that for a while, then opened them slowly, like someone who is tired of remembering, but knows she has to do it. She played because it was the only thing that made sense. When the notes came out of the violin, she felt that she existed, even if it was only for a few minutes. She was just the woman on the bench, but at that moment, she was alive. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes filled with tears. What he felt at that moment could not be put into words. It was pain for her, but also respect. A deep respect for this woman who, although wounded, was still standing, although invisible, had not given up. Although with no one there, she had continued playing, and now, lying there, so fragile, she was still fighting to exist. Emily remained silent for a few moments after telling her story. The room felt heavier, as if every memory had left something in the air. But even with everything she was carrying, there was something in her eyes now, a small, hidden, but strong sparkle. She turned her face slowly, looked at Michael, and said softly, "My son's name is Ethan." The word hung in the air as if time had stopped. Michael didn't respond. He couldn't. It was as if someone had knocked the air out of his chest, as if a memory had suddenly hit him hard. His eyes froze, his hands grew cold, and the name echoed inside him with a weight that no other name had ever had. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to hide it, but his face said it all. Emily noticed. Was something wrong? She took a moment to answer. She was still trying to understand. "My brother's name was Ethan too," she said in a low voice, almost a whisper. "He died when he was 6. Silence fell again, but now it was a different kind of silence, filled with something neither of them could explain. "Yes, it's a beautiful name, isn't it?" Emily tried to smile, but her eyes filled with tears again. "Yes," Michael replied, still looking at her, "very beautiful." He moved away a little, as if he needed to breathe. He went to the window and looked outside. The morning was alive with people coming and going, but inside him everything was still. Was it a coincidence, just the name of a child? Or was it more than that? He went back to the bed and stared at his hand, the marks, the wounds, how fragile it was, and he thought about everything, about what he had almost lost, about the miracle, about the music, about the child she had raised alone, and about that name that had come back into his life after so many years as if it had never really left. "How old is he?" he asked, trying not to cry. 5, Emily replied in a low voice. "He'll be 6 in October." Michael couldn't hold back. He lowered his face, his eyes filled with tears. 6 again, he repeated. It was as if life at that moment was repairing something he could never fix on his own. As if in that child he did not yet know there was a part of something lost, something he had to find again. And in that simple room, with white walls and machines everywhere, an invisible bond began to form between 2 Ethans. One who was gone and one who needed to be cared for. Days of waiting passed. Emily was still weak, but every beat of her heart sounded stronger. Her face had a little more color. Her eyes were opening with less effort, and deep down a single question repeated itself every day. "Where is my son?" Michael understood her silence when she didn't ask out loud. He understood the emptiness in her eyes between one conversation and the next. And so, even though it wasn't his duty, even though it wasn't his job, he decided to look for him. He called his contacts, made some phone calls, spoke with the hospital's social services team. He wanted her to have at least that reunion, that certainty. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon, Ethan arrived. He was holding hands with a simple woman, the neighbor who looked after him when his mother went out to play music on the street. The boy was wearing a blue sweatshirt and old sneakers, and he was carrying a worn red toy car in his hands. His hair was tousled, his eyes alert but distrustful. Michael went to get him in the hallway, crouched down in front of the boy and said, "Your mommy is waiting for you inside, but walk slowly." "Yes, she's still recovering." Ethan said nothing, just nodded his head. But when the door to the room opened, he forgot to walk slowly. He ran. His little legs crossed the room in a second. Emily heard the noise before she saw him. She turned her face away, her eyes filling with tears, and when she saw her son running toward her, the world stopped. "Son?" Her voice came out broken, emotional, with a smile that trembled more than her lips. Ethan climbed onto the bed as best he could, threw himself into her arms, and hugged her tight as if he were afraid she would disappear again. Emily hugged him with all the strength she had left. She cried softly, hiding her face in his hair. "Everything's okay now. Mommy's here. Mommy's back." The boy didn't say anything. He just stayed there as if that was his whole world. As if that hug was the only thing that existed. Cale watched from afar, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed and his heart aching. It was beautiful to see, but it also hurt because at that moment he saw another Ethan. The one he didn't have the chance to hug again, the one he couldn't save, and now there in front of him was this boy with the same name, the same embrace. It was as if time had made a change, as if fate had given him a chance to rescue him, to heal. When Emily could breathe again, she looked at Michael and said with tears in her eyes, "He stayed with a neighbor while I was playing. I came home late, tired, with almost nothing, but it was all for him. Only for him." She caressed her son's face. "Sometimes we didn't have any real food. Sometimes there was only stale bread and water with sugar, and even so, he would give me a kiss and say, 'Thank you, Mommy.'" Ethan was still there hugging her, silent, as if that moment was all that mattered. Michael looked away for a moment, his chest ached with gratitude, sadness, something he didn't even know how to explain. But there, in that simple room, with an old cart on the floor and a child in his mother's arms, he understood something. There are reunions that are worth a lifetime. 2 days after the reunion, the room that had once been a refuge for immense love was now filled with a cold tension. Emily sat with Ethan, asleep on her lap. Her fingers ran slowly through the boy's hair in a distracted but constant caress, as if that touch were the only thing keeping her standing. The door opened slowly. 2 people entered, a social worker from the hospital and an elderly woman from the juvenile clear court. They were carrying folders, papers, and serious looks. Michael was in the room and quickly realized that this was not going to be a pleasant conversation. The social worker spoke calmly, but her words hit like a hammer. "Mrs. Emily, first of all, we are very happy about your recovery, but we need to talk about Ethan's situation." She held her son tighter against her body. Her whole body became tense. "What's wrong with my son?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The older woman was direct. "We received a report from the neighbor who was looking after him. According to her, he spent several nights alone with little food, poor hygiene, and no legally responsible adult present." Emily didn't respond, just stared, trying to understand what that meant. Her voice was weaker now. The social worker sighed. "It means that for Ethan's own safety, protocol dictates that we temporarily remove him from your custody until you are in a stable condition." She didn't hear the end of the sentence. The floor disappeared beneath her. Her heart raced. She looked down at the sleeping child in her lap, his face peaceful, his little body curled up against her chest as if it were the only safe place in the world. "No, please," she whispered. "Don't do this. He's all I have." Michael tried to intervene, approaching her. She almost died. She fought to live. He needs her as much as she needs him. You can't take that away from him now. The woman from the courthouse was firm. "We understand, but there is a protocol. And the mother's financial situation is unstable. No income, no home of her own, no family support." Emily was shaking. Despair rose quickly, like panic rising from her stomach to her throat. "Look at me," she said with tears in her eyes, looking at the social worker. "I did everything for him, everything. Even when I was hungry, even when I was on the street, I never stopped coming back. I never abandoned him. I am his mother, and he is the only person who looks at me as if I am worth something." The woman hesitated. The silence became heavy. Ethan stirred in her lap, murmuring something, but he did not wake up. Emily hugged him tightly, as if the world were trying to take away the only thing she had left. And she spoke softly to no one, but to everyone. "If they take him away from me, I don't know what will be left of me." And at that moment, neither the papers nor the protocols nor the coldness of the words could hide what everyone had before their eyes. A mother broken by the world, but complete for her son. A woman who almost died and now almost lost him again, but this time alive. That same afternoon, after the social workers left the room, leaving behind a heavy silence and Emily's pale face, Michael stood in the hallway. The sound of his shoes could be heard coming and going, leading nowhere. He ran his hand through his hair, took a deep breath, looked at the ceiling, at the floor, and couldn't get the image of Emily hugging her son out of his head, as if she were holding a part of her own body. He knew what he had to do, but he also knew what he couldn't. The hospital had clear rules. Getting involved with patients outside the clinical area was prohibited, but that wasn't a common case. This was real life. These were people in need of people. And so he made up his mind. He left the hospital with his head down, not speaking to anyone. He walked to the nearest supermarket, his clothes wrinkled and his eyes tired. He grabbed a cart and started throwing everything that came to mind into it. Fruit, milk, cookies, rice, pasta, oil. Then he stopped at the toy section. He didn't know what 5-year-olds liked. He chose a little blue truck that reminded him of the one his younger brother had when he was a child. Then a package of colored Play-Doh and a coloring book. Finally, she bought some small sneakers and a pair of children's jeans. She paid for everything in silence. She grabbed the bags. She walked back, not caring about the weight. She was carrying more than food in her arms. He carried the decision not to stay still, not to watch a mother lose her son while he was still fighting to get up. When he arrived at the hospital, he entered discreetly, went to the room with his eyes alert, making sure no one from the administrative area saw him. He opened the door slowly. Emily was sitting staring into space. Ethan was playing on the floor with the same old toy car from before. Both of their eyes were dull and tired. When they saw Michael with the bags, he tried to smile, a little nervous, a little moved. "I brought you some things," he said, putting everything on the small table in the corner. Emily frowned in confusion. "But why?" He looked at her firmly. "Because you need them. Because no one is going to take your child away from you? Because you don't have food or clothes?" "No, not as long as I can do something." She didn't know what to say. She opened one of the bags and saw the toys. Her eyes filled with tears. She took the sneakers out of the bag and held them in her hands as if they were gold. Ethan approached curiously. When he saw the new toy truck, his eyes lit up. "Is it mine?" he asked quietly. Michael smiled. "Yes, now it is." The boy hugged the toy tightly. Emily watched everything in silence, her mouth half open and her hands shaking. "You shouldn't be doing this," she said, her voice breaking. "You could get in trouble." He took a deep breath. "Maybe, but you know what gets me in more trouble than anything else? Staying still, pretending I don't see them, and letting them leave with empty hands." She covered her face with her hands and cried again, but this time it was a different kind of cry, a cry of relief, of not being invisible. And in that simple room, without luxuries or promises, something bigger happened. Someone chose to care, chose to reach out. Even if the world said otherwise, a few more days passed. The hospital remained the same, with cold hallways, white walls, and that smell that mixes disinfectant with silence. But something had changed there. At least inside one room in particular, Michael always arrived with something in his hands. A snack, a box of crayons, a little book, a carefully cut piece of fruit. He didn't have to. No one asked him to, but he always came. Ethan Yan was scared when he saw the door open. He ran with quick steps and an easy smile, as if he had been waiting for him all day. "Uncle Michael," he shouted with his little arms open. The first time he heard that, Michael stood still. He stood there for a moment. His heart stumbled. "Uncle?" The word came out strongly. It was loaded with something he didn't know he still had. A kind of love without obligation, a place he didn't even remember knowing. "Uncle Michael," Ethan repeated, pulling on his pants with his little hand. Michael bent down and smiled sideways. Not knowing what to say, he just hugged him. Emily watched from afar, silent, but her eyes said it all. It was as if she was seeing a scene she never dared to dream of. The two of them laughing together, the boy telling how he drove the truck around the room, the doctor pretending he was a giant monster and had to escape from the wheels. Everything so simple and so strange. Over time, Michael began to stay a little longer. He would sit on the floor, draw with Ethan, and tell made-up stories. Sometimes Emily would laugh at the silly things he said. Sometimes she just watched, but inside her something was also beginning to change. One night, as Michael was saying goodbye, Ethan grabbed his leg. "You're coming tomorrow, right, Uncle Michael?" Michael looked at Emily. She just nodded with a calm, almost grateful look. He bent down and touched the boy's face. "If you want me to, I'll come back." And there, in that simple moment, a feeling was born that he hadn't felt since he was a child. Something that had been lost over time since Ethan, his brother, he hadn't allowed himself to feel that kind of affection. But now the name was coming back again and again from the mouth of a child who didn't know the weight that word carried. It was as if life was slowly mending what had been broken, as if that child was there to remind Michael who he was and who he could still be. It was late. The light coming through the window was golden, calm, the kind that makes a room feel warmer and more human. Emily was sitting on the bed with her hair pulled back and a curious but tired look on her face. Ethan was sleeping in a corner, hugging the little blue truck that Michael had brought him a few days earlier. Michael was standing by the window, looking at the sky. The silence between them was comfortable, but suddenly her voice came out softly like a sigh. "Doctor, you already know what I had, right?" Michael turned slowly, not answering right away. She took a deep breath as if thinking of the best way to say it without hurting him. "Do you really want to know?" She nodded her head. "Yes, I do. It's just that sometimes I start thinking, what if it was a mistake? What if I did die? Or I don't know." He pulled up a chair, sat down next to the bed, and ran his hand through his hair in silence for a few seconds. We repeated all the tests, and yes, I know what it was. But he looked her in the eyes honestly. "I don't know if knowing the name will give you peace." She smiled a little. "I don't want to live with that doubt eating away at me as if it's going to happen again. If I'm going to pass out again in the street." Michael sighed and looked down. It was a rare condition, very rare. A reaction of your body that fooled even the machines. Your heart slowed down so much and for so long that it seemed like the end, but it wasn't. "Not for you," she frowned. "So they gave me up for dead." "Alive?" "Yes," he said firmly. "They brought you to me and I almost made the first cut, but something stopped me." "And what do you call that?" He hesitated. He smiled slightly. "Let's call it luck or maybe a miracle. Which do you prefer?" Emily looked at him for a moment, her eyes filled with tears. "Miracle," she replied, "because if I say it was luck, then my son could have been left without a mother, and I could have been left without seeing that smile again." They remained silent. Michael squeezed her hand gently. "The important thing is that you're here and alive and whole and stronger than before." She nodded, her face calm but her heart heavy with everything that had happened. Still, there was a sense of relief there, not because of the diagnosis, but because of the way he responded. Because sometimes the most human response is the one that doesn't explain, the one that embraces. It was a clear morning. The hospital was busier than usual. Nurses came and went, doors opened, voices could be heard in the hallways. But in the room where Emily was recovering, time seemed different, slower, quieter. Ethan played with toy cars on a makeshift table. Emily looked at him with a tired but present smile. Michael, as always, was nearby, checking her vital signs, writing in the file, but always with his gaze divided between the paper and the child. Suddenly, Ethan got up and went to the door, as if waiting for someone, and as if by magic, one of the nurses appeared with an object wrapped in an old cloth. Ethan took it carefully with both hands and walked slowly back to the center of the room. "Uncle Michael, can I give it to her now?" he asked. Michael bent down in surprise. "Sure, champ. Go ahead." Ethan turned to his mother and, with a smile bigger than himself, handed her the package. "It's for you, Mommy. When you get better, I want you to play again." Emily froze for a second. Her eyes widened, and she brought her hands to her mouth. When she unwrapped the cloth, what she saw took her breath away. An old violin, marked by time but intact with the string still firm, and the bow tied with a ribbon to the body of the instrument. She took it delicately, as if she were holding a piece of her soul that she had left behind. "Son, where did you find this?" Ethan blushed. "I saw it in an old store on the street near Auntie's house. I told the man your story, and he gave it to me." Emily couldn't hold back. The tears came out hot and thick. They fell without sorrow, without haste. "If you heard me, you did, didn't you? Even though I thought you were too little to understand, you heard me." He ran his hand over the violin as if he had found a lost part of his body. He closed his eyes, rested his chin on the instrument, just as he had done on the street. In the cold, early mornings, the bow slid over the strings with a small squeak, and then the soft sound came out, hesitant at first, but soon the melody found its way. It was a slow song, unhurried, as if it were telling everything she had lived through: the abandonment, the struggle, the fear, the near death, and the hope. Each note was a whisper, each pause a sigh. Ethan sat on the floor quietly. Michael closed his eyes, and for a moment they were no longer there. He went back in time. He saw his little brother laughing with his eyes shining. He remembered the sunsets with that out-of-tune violin that Ethan tried to play on his lap. He remembered the pure, simple joy, the interrupted childhood. And there, in that fragile music, in that white hospital room, he felt his brother's laughter, like an echo, like a living memory that crosses time and comes back to touch him. When the music ended, the silence was louder than any applause. Emily wiped her eyes. Ethan hugged her from behind, holding her tight. Michael kept his eyes closed for a second longer, then looked at her. "You have no idea what you just did." And Emily replied with a broken voice, "I just knocked to remind you that I'm still here in that room." At that moment, everyone knew life had not only returned, it was singing again. Life hadn't just come back. It was singing again. The day of discharge arrived. Emily was standing in the same simple clothes she had worn when she entered the hospital. But her gaze was different. There was still tiredness, of course, in her body and in her soul. But now there was also a sparkle, a kind of light that only those who have been through darkness know. Ethan held his mother's hand tightly, his backpack on his back, and the blue truck hanging from one of his fingers. The violin was wrapped in an old sheet. And Michael was standing in the doorway, not moving. "So, is that it?" Emily asked, forcing a smile. "End of the stay?" He nodded but didn't say anything right away. His heart felt heavy in his chest, as if he were forgetting something, or rather as if something very valuable were slipping away from him. Emily approached him and touched his arm gently. "We'll never forget what you did." "Never." He swallowed hard and looked at the child who was already calling him with a shy little hand. "Uncle Michael, are you going to visit us?" It was there in that simple question, in that little boy's voice speaking from the heart, that he felt it. He felt that he could no longer walk away, that those two lives were now linked to his, even though he hadn't noticed it before, that it wasn't just any old thank you. It was something deeper, something that called him back every day. "Can I come tomorrow?" he asked, looking Emily in the eyes. She laughed excitedly. "If you don't go, you'll be missed." And he went. The next day he arrived with fresh bread and coffee with milk. The next day with a storybook and a new blanket. Then he brought paint and paper for Ethan to paint. A small bottle of perfume for Emily, fruit, used clothes, a smile. He always arrived as if it were nothing, but he stayed for hours, sitting in the tiny kitchen, on the floor, on the doorstep, listening to Emily talk about her childhood, laughing at the things Ethan said, listening to the soft sound of the violin being tuned, and over time he didn't even realize that he was no longer a visitor. He was part of the family. That bond that began with a miracle was now a choice. Michael didn't have to be there, but he was there every day. Not out of obligation, but out of desire, out of love. It was a decision of the heart, the hardest and the right one. It was a cloudy afternoon, one of those days when it looks like the sky is going to fall, but it doesn't rain. The air was heavy, and the silence of the house was broken only by the sound of leaves hitting the window. Emily washed the dishes slowly, thoughtfully, while Ethan drew on the living room floor with colored pencils. The violin was leaning in a corner, resting. Michael hadn't arrived yet that day. When the doorbell rang, Emily got a start. She quickly dried her hands on a cloth and went to answer the door. It was two women from social services, the same ones she already knew, the same ones she feared. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Emily. Can we come in for a moment?" She nodded, trying not to show the lump she felt in her throat. They entered with folders in their hands, their expressions cold and formal. "We received a new analysis of your situation, and unfortunately it continues to appear unstable. With no income, informal housing, and no family to support you, Emily felt the floor disappear from under her feet." "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. The other woman replied, "It means that we are urgently considering temporarily transferring the child to a safe shelter until you can provide adequate conditions." Upon hearing this, Ethan got up and ran to his mother, hugging her leg without fully understanding. "Mommy, I don't want to go to the shelter." Emily fell to her knees and hugged her son tightly. "No, please, no. I'm trying, I'm fighting. He's all I have." The women looked at each other. One tried to speak more softly. "It's temporary, just until you get back on your feet." But Emily wasn't listening anymore. She was just crying. Her face was buried in her son's hair. It was as if the whole world was about to take away the only thing that gave her life meaning. It was at that moment that the door opened again. Michael came in with a bag of fresh bread in his hand. He stopped as soon as he saw the scene and quickly knelt down next to Emily. What happened? She, between sobs, nodded. The words came out broken. "They want to take Ethan and to a shelter." Michael looked straight at the two women. His eyes were different, firm, full. "No, that's not going to happen." The two women hesitated. "Mr. Michael, we understand your relationship with the family." But he interrupted. "Listen, I'm a doctor. I have a stable income. Come and a permanent address. No criminal record. I want to take care of him with her, together with her." Emily looked up in surprise, confused. "Are you saying that, Michael?" He looked at her with a calmness she had never seen before, a certainty that dispelled any doubt. "I'm saying that we're going to take care of him together. If you want security, you have it. I'll sign whatever is necessary." The assistants were silent for a moment. They looked at each other, then at Emily, and finally at Ethan, who was hugging his violin as if it were a shield. And there, at that moment, without big speeches or fairy tale promises, a new family was born. Not the most common, but the most real, made of struggle, pain, and decision. Time passed silently, as always, but this time it brought something different. With each visit, each chat at the front door, each timid tune at the end of the afternoon, Michael and Emily grew closer without rushing, without promises. Just allowing themselves to be together, caring for each other, and more than anything, caring for Ethan, always under the pretext of caring for Ethan. But the two were growing closer, more together, more united, more inseparable. When the idea of marriage came up, it wasn't with fanfare. There was no proposal on bended knee or ring hidden in a dessert. It was during a kitchen conversation between a cup of tea and the dishes being rinsed. "What if we make it official?" he asked, almost without looking up. Emily smiled, that smile of someone who already knew. "Make it official." "What?" "What we already are. It would be better so that the social worker wouldn't have any more doubts." She just nodded her head. And in that silence, they said yes. Months later, the neighborhood registry office woke up to sunshine. It was a beautiful, simple day with the smell of warm bread from the nearby bakeries and people passing by with grocery bags. Inside, in a modest room with beige walls and plastic flowers on the table, one of the most beautiful scenes anyone could ever see took place. Emily entered wearing a borrowed white dress. No frills, no lace, but clean light with a drape that seemed tailor-made for her. Her hair was loose, held back only by a flower at her side, her face radiant, illuminated, as if to say, I made it. I survived. Ethan was the one who carried the rings. He was wearing a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his hair combed to the side, and shoes that were still a little too big for him in the heel. But what caught the most attention was his smile. Proud and excited, he walked to the table with the care of someone carrying the world. Here, uncle. Michael took the rings from the little hands and bent down to kiss the boy's forehead. Thank you, champ. When he stood up, he looked at Emily. The two looked at each other as if time had stopped. It wasn't a love made of explosive passion, but of healing, of complicity, of warmth. The justice of the peace said the formal words, but no one there paid attention to the terms. What really mattered was the gesture, the choice, the fact that two wounded people had found each other and decided to stay together. At the moment of saying, I do, she took a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears. Yes. And he said in a low but firm voice, yes. The applause was discreet, a few claps from friends in the row of married couples, a few civil registry workers, but for them it was as if the whole world had stopped to watch that moment. Outside, Ethan ran down the sidewalk, carrying the folded papers and his little truck in the other hand, and Emily, with her arm linked to Michael's, said softly, I never imagined I'd get this far. And look at us now, he replied, looking ahead, and now we're going much further. And they left. The house was small. The paint was peeling on one side, the gate creaked when it opened, and the wooden fence was a little crooked. But there was something there that no other place in the world had. Peace. It was close to the hospital. Michael could walk there and back. Ethan already knew the way from school to the door. And Emily had, for the first time in many years, a place she could call her own, even if it was rented, even if the roof leaked when it rained. It was her home. The yard was simple with a dirt floor and some plants in paint cans. There was a skinny tree in one corner that somehow provided shade. There, in that little space, a whole world was formed. Ethan played every afternoon, running back and forth with his blue truck, drawing on the ground with sticks, making up stories out loud. Sometimes he talked to himself. Sometimes he talked to Uncle Michael, even when he wasn't there. When Emily finished her chores, she would go under the tree, sit on a little bench made of 2 bricks and a board, put her violin on her knees, close her eyes for a moment, and play. The music sounded different now. It was still soft, still sad in some parts, but it had life. It had color. It had that kind of joy that comes after a storm, as if each note were saying, "We survive." Michael often stood at the gate. He didn't come in right away. He just stood there listening, watching Ethan run barefoot with his face sweaty, laughing, watching Emily with the violin on her chin, her eyes closed as if she were dancing with her own past, but no longer afraid of it. It was impossible not to feel something beautiful. They had no luxuries, no expensive furniture or elegant carpets, but they had time together, time to talk without rushing, to laugh about anything, to cook and spill salt, to fall asleep on the couch with the TV on. On the living room wall, a drawing by Ethan showed the 3 of them holding hands with a crooked house behind them and a sun above them. In the corner he had written in crooked letters, "My family." And that was it. In the simplicity of that little home, in the random notes of the violin, in the noise of the little wheels of the truck in the yard, there lived what many people spend their whole lives searching for. Love. It was dawn. The house was silent. From the bedroom, you could hear Emily's quiet breathing and the little sighs of Ethan, who was sleeping with his blue truck pressed against his chest. Michael was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with a blank sheet of paper in his hand and a simple pen. The light from the nightstand cast a warm glow through the room. It wasn't normal for him to write, but that night he felt he had to, as if what was in his heart could only come out that way. He took a deep breath and began. Ethan, I never knew how to talk to you after you left. I was only 11 and you were 6. But your absence grew with me. It became bigger than any memory. It stayed in my chest like something I didn't know how to heal. For years I tried to move on. I studied, I became a doctor, and even though I said it was my vocation, deep down, I know it was to compensate. It was to try to prevent other Ethans from leaving like you did. But no matter how hard I tried, you were still here. In every hospital room, in every weak heartbeat, in every body I couldn't save. Until one night she arrived. A young woman, weak, quiet, given up for dead, but with something different, something I couldn't explain, only feel. I listened, and she was alive. And with her came her Ethan, a 5-year-old boy with big eyes and a smile that looks just like yours. He runs around the courtyard with a truck in his hands. He calls me Uncle Michael and hugs me as if he's known me for a long time. Maybe he does know me. And look, brother, for the first time in many years, I don't feel like I failed. I'm taking care of him and his mom. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because I chose to. Because somehow taking care of Ethan makes me feel closer to you. We have a simple house, a dirty yard, a little wooden bench where she plays the violin every afternoon. And when the sound comes out of the strings, it's like you're sitting there with me, laughing like before. This letter is just to tell you that I haven't forgotten you. I never will. But now I can smile when I think of you, because today there is another Ethan sleeping next to me, and he is safe. I love you very much, brother. With love always. Michael finished writing with tears in his eyes. He folded the paper carefully, put it in an envelope, and without saying a word, he opened the drawer of the bureau and put it away. He left it there next to an old photo, the only one he had of the two of them together as children lying in the grass. He turned off the light and went to bed with his heart at peace for the first time in a long time. Time passed a little more, and with it the pain transformed into something greater, purpose. Emily, now stronger, with calm eyes and a firmer body, took the violin in her hands and decided that she would no longer play just for herself. The music that had once been her refuge, that had accompanied her on cold nights, that had whispered hope to her when all seemed lost, would now become a bridge between her and other children who, like her, once felt they had no one. It was Michael who found the space. A small room at the back of a community center near the hospital, simple with a broken table, 2 windows without glass, and plastic chairs. But when Emily walked in for the first time with her violin slung over her shoulder and Ethan by her side, the place came to life. The first classes were timid. 3 children, all with the same look in their eyes, the look of someone who has seen too much for their age. But little by little, the magic began. She taught without rushing, with patience, with love. The little fingers made mistakes at first. The strings sounded bad, but she smiled, played with them, corrected them tenderly. Guya, it doesn't matter if it sounds bad. What matters is that it comes from inside, she said. And the children understood because it wasn't just music. It was care. It was listening. It was a hug without touching. Over time, more students arrived. They came in sandals with their notebooks in their hands and borrowed violins under their arms. Tinto Emily gave them one by one, picked them up, fixed them, tuned them. Sometimes she stayed late repairing the bows with tape, changing the strings with wire, improvising, but she was completely there, alive, happy. One day, a girl named Sophia, skinny with braids and calm eyes, stopped the class in the middle, hiding behind her violin. She looked at Emily and asked, "Did you always know how to play like that?" Emily smiled. I didn't learn because music was the only thing that listened to me when no one else did. Sophia nodded, then played a little note out of tune. They laughed together. At the end of class, Emily stayed alone in the room. She picked up her own violin and played a slow melody similar to the one she played in the hospital when it all began. And when she finished, she closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Music saved me. Now it's my turn to save someone else." And it was because there, in that simple room, without a stage or applause, an orchestra of new beginnings was born. Music made of broken stories, rebuilt with notes and love. Michael stood at the door of the little room where Emily gave her lessons. He watched from afar as the children played their makeshift violins, smiling, making mistakes, and getting things right, all treated with affection. The music could be heard down the hallway, soft, beautiful, full of history behind every note. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and thought about everything. The autopsy table, the scalpel, the movement in his neck, the doubt, the silence, the decision. And then he spoke, not out loud, but with that voice that comes from the chest. How many lives have we declared lost without really looking? How many times have we left someone behind because we were tired, in a hurry, or afraid? What if it only took a second? Just 1 second of attention to save everything. He opened his eyes. Emily smiled at him from across the room. Ethan ran and threw himself into his arms, laughing. Uncle Michael. Michael hugged the boy tightly. He felt the warmth of that little body. He felt the present stitching itself to the past. And there, he understood everything. Sometimes your whole life changes in an instant. If you're willing to see, now tell me, what if it had been you? Would you have noticed that movement in his neck? Would you have held someone's hand when everything told you to let go? Would you have opened your heart like Michael, or had the courage of Emily to start over? Leave it here in the comments. What would you have done in their place? What part of this story touched you the most? And don't forget to activate the bell, because every week there is a new story with emotion, truth, and a lot of soul. And look, if this story moved you, click now on the video on the screen. It's another true story that has already made many people cry and think differently about life. You won't be the same after watching it. Beautiful. See you there.